Let us look at the learning outcomes. After studying this module, you shall be able to know the basic idea of what the role of researcher is. Learn the processes of approaching an issue from a researcher's perspective. Learn about the ethical considerations in qualitative research. Introduction. Introduction to role of researcher. There are two main parts in this module. Part 1. Introduction to the role of researcher. This section outlines the basic characteristics and attributes required of a qualitative researcher. It goes on to outline the subtleties inherent in the process of approaching an issue from the point of view of a qualitative researcher and how a researcher copes with the challenges of a given problem situation. Part 2. Ethical considerations in qualitative research. Here, we analyze the ethical issues that a researcher needs to be aware of while dealing with the research participants, and also the interplay of power dynamics between the researcher and the researched.
Part 1. Introduction to the role of a researcher. The initial phase of qualitative research. How to approach an issue from a qualitative researcher's perspective. Foremost, it is essential that the qualitative researchers, especially those dealing with the sensitive issues, estimate and assess the impact the research will have on both the participants and themselves. It requires an approach on the part of the researcher such that the transition to the field is smooth and the researcher doesn't face difficulties and inhibitions in approaching and interacting with the individuals concerned. It is now accepted that a researcher may face varied challenges during the course of the study. Some of the issues and challenges identified by the researchers are rapport formation. It is an essential process and of vast importance to a qualitative researcher. Rapport formation allows the participant to feel more comfortable and flexible in his conduct during the course of the research. It allows a qualitative researcher to build a relationship of trust, mutual understanding, and cooperation with the research participant. Reflexivity. Qualitative researchers are interested in how meanings are produced and reproduced within particular social, cultural, and relational contexts. They recognize the interview itself as one such context of interactive meaning making. Therefore, interpreting qualitative data requires reflection on the entire research context. Reflexivity involves making the research process itself a focus of inquiry, giving up preconceptions, and becoming aware of situational dynamics in which the interviewer and respondent are jointly involved in knowledge production. The qualitative researchers' enquiries typically focus on human subjects rather than objects, symbols, or abstractions. The subjective plays an important role in the social sciences as it is often ultimately what the researcher seeks to uncover and understand. how the social world is experienced, understood, and produced. While qualitative research seeks to understand the subjective experience, it must nonetheless be concerned with interpretive openness through a process by which the researcher attempts to acknowledge his or her prejudices, biases, and stereotypes that may come in the way of interpreting the responses of the participant in the research process. Nature of truth. Qualitative researchers primarily seek to understand meaning, but they do not assume that meanings are fixed and stable. They have no expectation that the truth is simply out there, waiting to be discovered by asking the right questions. They do not assume that their questions are objective, nor do they assume that respondents' answers have straightforward, definite meanings that mirror a singular reality. Rather, they hold that all meanings are interactively and culturally constructed. Individual social actors are variously located within social settings structured by gender, class, race, age, and other characteristics. Quite a number of researchers say that their research work and engaging with research participants has changed them in a number of ways. They all report similar experiences despite the fact that they are working in a wide variety of fields. Entering the research field. Often, the job of a qualitative researcher demands the researcher to closely unravel the life of another individual, which more than often includes talking about stressful and traumatic events in their life. This may take one sitting with the research participant or a number of them depending upon the research undertaken. Since matters sensitive to the participant are being discussed, it is essential that the researcher is mindful of his conduct and the rapport formation is well developed to ensure the participant's comfort. Part of the role of the qualitative researcher is to facilitate the participant disclosure. This disclosure can be heightened if there is a level of rapport between researcher and participant. Self disclosure on the part of a qualitative researcher. The use of self disclosure by researcher was reported by a number of participants. In order to ensure that the relationship between the researcher and the participant is non hierarchical, researchers are often involved in a reciprocal sharing of their personal stories. Although many researchers undertake some level of disclosure in research interviews, the intensity and frequency of disclosure may be different in research on sensitive topics. Self disclosure by researchers is often reported as good research practice, with some feminist writers advocating researchers' self disclosure. Researchers need to think through how much self disclosure they will undertake in the process of the research. While self disclosure is often cited as a way of leveling the field between the researcher and the researched, at times it can make the researchers feel vulnerable. Process of the interview and collecting data. Qualitative researchers attempt to access the human story, and in order to do this, it is important to remember the human side of the work. Researchers often refer to the need to be human in order to do this type of research. If caring is a basic human trait, then it is vital that researchers are able to care for another person during the research process. Caring theorists have identified a number of behaviors that they see as essentially caring behaviors. Leininger uses the following terms to illustrate some of the behaviors that may be expected when a person is involved in caring for another: comfort, passion, concern, coping behavior, empathy, enabling, facilitating, interest, involvement, sharing, support, tenderness, touching, and trust. In addition to caring theory, researchers often use the emotion work theory to outline the conduct of researchers. Emotion work is generally used to refer to the work involved in dealing with other people's emotions. A qualitative researcher is required to be caring, concerned, patient, and compassionate. A qualitative researcher must value the trait of just being with a participant, especially when the participant was disclosing something particularly intimate to the researcher. It should be noted that when a qualitative researcher interacts with research participants on a personal level, there is a possibility that the boundaries between the researcher and the research participant can become blurred. Some participants may have difficulties in differentiating between research and therapy, and many find participation in research has enormous therapeutic value. Analysis of data. There are a number of issues associated with transcription and analysis of qualitative data. The goal of transcription is to transform oral speech into a printed copy, accurately capturing the words of the research participant. Accurate transcription is a fundamental first step in data analysis. In order to undertake a transcription, researchers often listen to the interview tapes a number of times, becoming more familiar with the data on each go. Some researchers have acknowledged the difficulties associated with transcription of research interviews regarding sensitive topics. Transcribing a research interview on a sensitive topic can be an emotional experience for the transcriber, who often listens to powerful stories. The fact that qualitative research often requires supportive listening may make researchers ultimately more vulnerable and seem unprofessional. In the process of undertaking a research interview, researchers are often privy to these stories for a number of reasons. Ramos used the term Pandora's box to illustrate that in qualitative research, we often ask people to talk about aspects of their lives that they may not have previously discussed. As part of this process, a qualitative researcher may then become a secret keeper. In a particular research situation, a qualitative researcher might create a confessional situation for participants by openly inviting them to tell their story. This may provide an opportunity for a person to confess something that may be particularly difficult to tell anyone outside that situation. Thus, confessions can provide a sense of catharsis. The cathartic effects of research have been well documented in the literature, with many authors commenting on the perceived benefits of participating in research interviews. The whole research process, from the point of view of a qualitative researcher, can therefore be summarized as follows: formulation of the overall questions, formulation of specific research questions, formulation of sensitizing concepts, selection of research group on which to study the question, selection of appropriate designs and methods, collection of data, evaluation and reformulation of specific research questions, analyzing the data, generalization and evaluation of the analysis, formulation of the findings. Part 2: Ethical issues involved in qualitative research. The fundamental research ethics principles. Respect for persons requires a commitment from researcher to ensure the autonomy of research participants and, where autonomy may be diminished, to protect people from exploitation of their vulnerability. The dignity of all research participants must be respected. Adherence to this principle ensures that people will not be used simply as a means to achieve research objectives. Beneficence requires a commitment on part of the researcher to minimize the risks associated with research, including psychological and social risks, and maximizing the benefits that accrue to research participants. Researchers must articulate specific ways this will be achieved. Respect for communities confers on the researcher an obligation to respect the values and interests of the community in research and, wherever possible, to protect the community from harm. This principle is, in fact, fundamental for research when community wide knowledge, values, and relationships are critical to research success and may in turn be affected by the research process or its outcomes. Informed consent for qualitative research. The first task in achieving informed consent is to inform people about the research in a way they can understand. In general, data collection activities that require more than casual interaction with a person require individual informed consent from that person, regardless of whether community level permissions exist. Examples of such activities include in depth interviews and focus groups. The person should be told the purpose of the research, what is expected of a research participant, including the amount of time likely to be required for participation, expected risks and benefits, including psychological and social, the fact that participation is voluntary and that no one can withdraw at any time with no negative repercussions, how confidentiality will be protected, the name and contact information of the local lead investigator to be contacted for questions or problems related to the research, the name and contact information of an appropriate person to contact with questions about one's rights as a research participant, usually the chair of the local ethics committee overseeing the research. Confidentiality of information shared and anonymity of research participants. This principle is also concerned with offering respect and protection to research participants through assurance of confidentiality of information shared and anonymity by not revealing the identity of the individuals and institutions involved. Typically, anonymity is provided through the use of pseudonyms.
To summarize, in summary, it can be said that the following are the characteristics and roles expected of a qualitative researcher. Knowledgeable. He has an extensive knowledge of the interview theme without attempting to shine with his or her own knowledge. Structuring. Introduces the purpose of the interview, outlines in passing and rounds off the interview in a structured manner. Clear. Possesses clear, simple and short questions. Gentle. Allows participants to finish what they are saying and gives a patient hearing. Sensitive. Engages in active listening, trying to get a hold of the fine nuances. Open. Hears carefully which aspects of the interview topic are important for the participant. Steering. Is persistently aware of what he or she wants to know more about. Critical. Does not take everything at face value, but continually tests the reliability and the validity of the participants' statements. Remembering and retaining. Retains what was said earlier and perhaps asks later for elaboration. Interpreting. Works consistently to clarify and extend the meanings of the interviewee's statements, which may then be confirmed or disconfirmed by the interviewee.